Good day! Let me and my co-group discuss the definitions and history of indigenous people. First, what is indigenous people? Indigenous people, also referred to as First People. They are inheritors and practitioners of unique cultures and ways of relating to people and the environment. They have retained social, cultural, economic, and political characteristics that are distinct from those of the dominant societies in which they live. Indigenous peoples are the holders of unique languages, knowledge systems, and beliefs, and possess invaluable knowledge of practices for the sustainable management of natural resources. They have a special relation to and use of their traditional land.
As they used in the Constitution, the term indigenous cultural communities refers to those non-dominant groups in our country, which possess and wish to preserve ethnic, religious, or linguistic traditions or characteristics markedly different from the rest of the population. Sila yung mga pangkat etniko o katutubo tulad ng mga Aita, Tagbanwa, Mangyan at iba pang matatagal nang naninirahan sa ating bansa, na may sariling wika, paniniwala, kultura at tradisyon na marahil ay iba sa atin at maaring naging parte rin ng ating kasaysayan. Now, according to the Republic Act 8371 of 1997, an act to recognize, protect, and promote the rights of indigenous cultural communities or indigenous people, creating a National Commission to Indigenous People, establishing implementing mechanisms, appropriating funds, therefore and for purposes. Layo ng naturang batas na ito ang kilalanin at itaguyod ang karapatan ng mga katutubo sa bansa, tulad ng karapatan sa lupain at lupang ninuno, karapatan sa pamamahala at taglay na kapangyarihan, katarungang pangsambayanan at karapatang pangtao, at ang karapatan sa kultura ng kagalingan.
So, there are approximately 370 million indigenous people in the world, belonging to 5,000 different groups in 90 countries worldwide. So, we have China, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Arabia, Africa, Latin America, Canada, and USA. So, indigenous people live in every region of the world, but about 70% of them live in Asia. Natives of the world have their own way of living, and it is distant from the rest. There are some indigenous tribes that are located in South Asia. Bedas in Sri Lanka, Jarawa in India, Kalas in Pakistan, Naga in northeastern India and northwestern Myanmar, Ihap in southwest Bhutan, Bada in Nepal and northeastern India, and Giravaru in Maldives.
In the Philippines, the National Commission on Indigenous People, NCIP, has identified at least 100 cultural groups with more than 11 million members. About half of members of these tribal groups belong to the Muslim group that dominates the provinces of Cotabato, Lanao, Sulu, Zamboanga, and Basilan. There are 13 Muslim majorities Philippine ethnic groups, including the Moros. Indigenous people are the inheritors of followers of distinct traditions and ways of interacting with others and the world. In the Philippines, there are a lot of different ethnic communities which at very least it consists of 100 groups with more than 11 million members. About 50% of this group belongs to Muslim group that dominates some part of Philippines.
Moros are followers of Sunni Islam, which is the largest branch of Islam that's followed by most of the world's Muslims. Islam arrived in the southern islands of the Philippines from the historic interaction of Mindanao and Sulu region with other Indonesian islands, Malay islands, and Borneo. Now Islam became the most dominant influence on the Moro cultures because most Muslims live in parts of Mindanao, Palawan, and Sulu archipelago, an area known as Bangsamoro or the Moro region since the era of the Sultanate of Maguindanao and Sulu. And that's how Islam was influenced into the culture of the Moro people. Now let's get into the pre-colonial times in which before we were colonized. So before we even were called as a Filipino, the only way to identify inhabitants in the Philippines were according to the location of their settlements. For example, those who settled along riverbanks were called Taga-Ilog, Pangkapampangan, Subanon, Maranaos, and etc. These are the type of people that prefer to live near bodies of water, such as rivers, lakes, and seashores. Those who settled along the seacoasts were called Taga-Dagat, Tausug, and Pangasinenses. And these are the type of people that settled along the part of a land adjoining a sea or near the sea, like a beach, for example. And lastly, those who settled upland were called Tinggian, Bukidnon, Tagabundok, Tagbanwas, Tiboli, and etc. These are the type of people that are on steep mountainous areas where both agriculture and forestry were practiced as a way of living.
Indigenous people chose to live where they have a privilege to sustain their convenience living in this country. So they refuse to subordinate by the other group. However, they do not want to under their tribe in order to control the liberty of indigenous people. Whereas they would dominate their own tribe by choosing to separate from us. The foreign rulers called them Moros, Pagans, Simanones, Demodatos, savages, to divert them from those who accepted foreign rule. But today's indigenous people called Lumads, which means native of the land, or in Tagalog is katutubong lupa. Together with us, together with Filipinos. But for further, I think the living of indigenous people was more different from now to back then, because their living affects of the occurs changing civilization in this generation, because they can also work under the government, they can also vote, they are also have a birth certificate, they can also study in school because of the encourage of government to follow the system, and also because the influence of the other group.